Hello, dear patrons. Welcome to the Patron Jive stream. Sorry there haven't been any in a while. I've been up to a lot of stuff. I've been out filming on location. I've been to Cheddar Gorge to get stuff about my Mesolithic video that's going to come up about the Mesolithic hunter-gatherer of Europe. I've been to a few museums looking at ancient bell beaker artifacts, some of the religious artifacts associated with the first Indo-Europeans to set foot on British soil. There's going to be some good videos coming up on those topics. I also intend to do a big old DNA analysis of Tokharians and say once and for all who are the Tokharians and who are the white mummies of the Chinese Tarim Basin. You have all this to look forward to. But today, a film review, I think. A film review, not because I'm going to branch out and do film reviews all the time, although that could be something I'd enjoy doing, but just because this one's a historical film and it covers a lot of the ground that Survive the Jive is concerned with. So I recommend you watch the film before you watch the review, I suppose, but if you don't mind seeing some spoilers, then go ahead and watch this, because I'm just going to spoil this film. I'm not into any, keeping any secrets or anything of the kind. When I do a film review, I treat the text as a text that has value in its own merit, not merely on the fact that it's going to surprise you with an unexpected plot. This is a text for analysis, and this is a textual analysis. El Primo Re. What is El Primo Re? It means the first king in Latin, and it's an Italian independent film. This is no Hollywood or pedo-wood nonsense. This is a nice European film set in 753 BC in the proto-Roman town of Alba Longa. There is no diversity in this film. All the casting is done quite well. They've used actual Italian people to play the Proto-Latins. That makes a nice change, doesn't it, from the current trends in Hollywood and pedo-wood. And all the actors have to learn to speak Proto-Latin. That's very authentic, isn't it? They wouldn't do that in Hollywood. It's not even just in Latin, in an ancient language of Rome. It's in Proto-Latin, which is the language that was spoken before Rome was founded. And that when this film was set, before there was a city of Rome, before there were any such thing as Romans, when in the legends of the Romans, in case you're not aware, the town of Rome was founded by a man called Romulus, and he had a twin brother called Remus, and they together were the founding stock of the city, and they are alleged to have been descended from Trojan settlers who came to Italy, and they lived around the town of Alba Longa, which is nearby where Rome is now, the actual place of Rome. And these two boys were abandoned, in legend says they're abandoned in childhood and suckled by a she-wolf. But this film, which only had a 7.5 million euro budget, so it's quite low budget, but I don't think that really affects the film too much. It looks fine to me. I didn't ever think, this needed more money. In this film, they do away with some of the fantastical elements of the story of Romulus and Remus, but it still tells the story from a religious perspective. Now, the film is okay. Like, the film has some fantastical elements still about gods and prophecies and things, but the main thing is the she-wolf. But even when you start the film, the very beginning of the film, there seems to be a miraculous supernatural event of a flood. And it's very clear that the phenomena in the film, like natural disasters, fortunes and misfortunes, or whatever occurs, are seen from the perspective of these proto-Romans as the work of the gods. And the big theme of the film is the gods, and pleasing the gods and displeasing the gods, piety versus hubris. And that is excellent, because that is a main theme in Roman belief, in Roman politics, in Roman religion. It's what defined the Romans as a people, this view, their piety to the gods and their concern with fortune and misfortune. So this indie film is, in aesthetics, it looks a lot like a lot of other historical dramas, that come out in recent times. Some of them are a bit crap, and they're all influenced by Game of Thrones and Vikings on the History Channels. Even History Channel's Vikings was itself a cash-in on Game of Thrones. It's had a lot of success in its own right. It's completely historically inaccurate. The costumes are silly. Everyone wears brown, dirty clothes. Everyone looks dirty and silly. And this film is quite gritty and dirty and unglamorous because it's trying to cash in on that whole Vikings TM phenomenon. But I don't think it's that bad anyway. Like, I don't know how accurate the costumes are because I haven't ever researched Proto-Roman costume, but everything looks a lot darker than it should do. I'm sure there were a lot more dyes and colours used in 753 BC. I mean, that's contemporary with, Greek civilization stuff. And there's no reason to think they'd be all wearing primitive brown rags. Why? Every historical drama, whether it's set in medieval times or Roman times or whatever, they always want everyone to look like they're wearing brown rags and ripped clothes and, look like gay bikers half the time. Don't know why that is, but it's not really accurate. People loved colour in the old times. And today, colour has always been valued, and clean clothes have always been valued. People like to wear clean clothes, and they don't like to wear ripped clothes. And I don't know why people pretend that everyone used to look like proto-punks or whatever. So, after the flood, the two boys, who, as I said, weren't suckled by a she-wolf, but they've had some troubles estranging them from their family. Anyway, they're washed up on Alba Longa by this flood, having lost their flocks. They're pastoralists. Then they are enslaved in the town of Alba Longa, and they manage to escape through a big, violent and absurd, very Vikings-esque fight scene with dual wielding and such like that. No one seems to fight with a shield. That's another thing that you see in Vikings and other things like that. I remember once saw a terrible historical drama which is influenced by Vikings on the History Channel, and it was cool. It was meant to be a very interesting story of the Frisian king Redbad who resisted Christianity. But it was just really corny and cheesy and rubbish film, and unfortunately so many films will try and cash in on a phenomenon. But I would say this is more than that. It does try to nod to that aesthetic, but it's a good film. It's not like Redbad. There's a big fight scene, and I find it all very silly. If you like fight scenes, maybe you'll enjoy it more, but it just doesn't seem like accurate or interesting to me that much. It's more just like like Skyrim style swinging double weapons or whatever. After they escape and kill their captors, they actually get together a band of criminals who are captors as slaves, and they steal, or Remus rather asserts himself now as his brother Romulus is injured. So Remus starts to assert himself as a leader among this band of criminals, and he steals the Vestal Virgin. Now, this is a time when I should talk about what's historically accurate in the film and the actual parallels. Like, one thing that is well known about Rome, like all through Roman history up until Christianization, the Vestal Virgins were vital to Roman religion. The Romans say that this tradition of the Vestal Virgins goes back to before Rome was founded, and that it went back to Alba Longa, just like in this film. And apparently, basically, they had to during the Roman, the proper Roman times, Roman Republic, Roman Empire, there were 6 Vestal Virgins, and they were like in the second highest level of religious authority in all of Rome. They were very, very, powerful women. They had to be virgins, and they had to be selected between the ages of 6 and 10. Had no blemishes on them. They had to be from quite, good families, and they could then have the honour of being dedicated for at least 30 years to remain virgins from that time on, which basically means virgin for your life, because you're unlikely to be able to get married at the age of 36 in ancient times. And you're allowed to carry on being a Vestal Virgin for as long as you want afterwards as well. So most of them did, I expect. Your job is just to tend the immortal flame of Vesta. The goddess Vesta is who they were dedicated to. But lots of the rites and rituals of Rome, or pretty much all of them, required a Vestal to be present, or one of the attendants of the Vestals, or something like that. So the Vestals were sort of integrated in almost every single rite in Rome, but they also led specific rites themselves, like the womanly ones, like the rite of Bonadia, her festival, had a specific sacrifice of sows, which was only women were allowed to attend that. Men were forbidden from attending. But their job was to mainly attend the immortal flames, these 6 women. But originally there was only one in Albalong, only one virgin, and she carried the immortal flame of Vesta. And in this film, the people of Albalonga have this flame, which they call the god in the film, rather than Vesta. Vesta herself was not represented as an idol in wood or stone in time of Roman Empire or Roman Republic, except outside in other temples. But in her own temple, she was only represented by a flame, a pure flame, which was maintained, as I say, by the virgins, who would be severely punished if they allowed it to go out and neglected their duties, or if they were allowed themselves to be contaminated by sexual intercourse, as they were accused sometimes with enormous controversy. For example, in the Second Punic War against the Carthaginians, when Rome started to do not so well in the fight, it was assumed that someone had not honoured the gods properly. They had not been pious, and that led to accusations and a trial against several Vestal virgins that they had been engaging in sexual intercourse, and had thus brought the fury of the gods upon the people. Bear in mind that in those days, Roman perspective, the worst possible crimes were not rape and murder. Rape and murder weren't even seen as that bad crimes. The worst crimes not only required the worst punishments, but were also seen as crimes which would affect you in the afterlife. Rapists and murderers went to pretty much the same afterlife as everyone else, because those aren't that severe a crime. But people who betrayed their nation, or people who insulted the dignity of the gods, had specific punishments, far greater in the afterlife than other people would have to endure. Because to betray your people or to insult the gods are the greatest of crimes in a traditional society, far greater than anything else imaginable. So you can imagine what would happen to these Vestal virgins. They were buried alive if they didn't do their duties properly. But in the film, there's one Vestal virgin, and in the legend, Romulus carries this tradition on from Albalonga into Rome, and that's what happens in the film too. But in what's not covered in the film is afterwards, it's Numa, who's not in this film. He is the one who establishes the religion of Rome as we now know it, and he is the one who really establishes the importance of the Vestal virgins in Rome in Roman times. But in this film, what they do, they steal this Vestal virgin, and they believe that now Remus steals her at Romulus's request, and they believe that having stolen her and taken her and then won her favor, and then she wants to help them, and how that they have this virgin, then they also have the favor of the goddess, and that means they will have good fortune, unlike the bad fortune that Romulus and Remus have previously experienced. Now they believe things will go their way, and they do seem to go their way, because Remus suddenly starts to achieve power. All this band of warriors, they obey him. And it's said, even in the Roman legends, that Rome was founded by a band of criminals. You know, all the scumbags from the local area all founded Rome. They even say that in their own legend, kind of like Australia. Well, that's what happened with Rome, and that's what happens in the film too. It's this band of, rough ragtag brigands, and they find a village, and they kill the men of the village, and then Remus declares himself the king of that village. And then so as you can see, they're mixing the legendary story into a more like historic, non-supernatural story, until suddenly things do take a supernatural turn at this point in the film, when the theme of hubris is expanded upon, and the Vestal Virgin having she basically becomes favourable to Remus. I think she fancies him, basically. That's dodgy. They don't do anything though. But she says, "Are you a god? Only a god can touch me." But Remus basically goes a little loony, and he is essentially I think this film, what interests me more than the historical elements, because I mean, it's the idea of the Nietzschean versus the Nietzschean like nihilistic sort of will to power versus the pious and religious mindset. And one thing, I mean, it's not really expanded on. It's like the Indo-European theme of the divine twins, the divine horse twins. And that's what Romulus and Remus actually are. They are like the Dioscuri in Greece, and Castor and Pollux are horse twins also in classical religion. But the just as like you can say this horse twin motif in Indo-European religion manifests itself in the Germanic sense as the divine twins of Freya and Freyr, but also in West Germanic legend as the founding progenitors of the English race, Hengist and Horsa, who were also the progenitors of the Saxon race. Well, similarly, Romulus and Remus are also a variant progenitors, these divine twins who founded the Roman race, and you can see this in a few different Indo-European myths. So it's unlikely Romulus and Remus ever actually existed. They were just like Hengist and Horsa, like gods, basically, founding gods who had been assigned this role. But that isn't worth talking about in the context of the film, because they don't really look at that theme. Like in this film, it's a historical film, and Romulus and Remus are seen to be real humans. So what's more interesting then is how they explore the theme of religion versus atheism, which is an important one for us to consider today. Very important. So it was at this stage in the film that you get basically Haruspects is when the Roman people look at the future by examining the guts of a chicken, and having established themselves as a power in Romulus is sick, but Remus is basically the big dog, and he's established himself as the power in this town, and he gets the Vestal to have a go at Haruspects and see what the future is, and she says one of them's going to be a great king, one of them. But when Remus finds out that the one of them will betray the other, one of the twins, Romulus and Remus, will kill the other and then become a great king. At first he thinks it means he has to kill his sick brother Romulus. He assumes it's him who's the great king because Remus is the powerful guy and Romulus is sick. But then when he learns it's the other way around, well, even before he learns it's the other way around, he gets angry. He defies the will of the gods. He doesn't want to kill his brother. And when he finds out later it's the other way around, he's also angry. But the theme emerges then when he hears a prophecy from the seeress that he disagrees with. He rejects it. No, me, I, not the gods, me, let me do everything. I will be the one who decides my future, not the gods. This kind of thing. Very un-pagan, very un-European, Indo-European. Very bad. Very un-Roman. This is complete opposite of what Romans actually thought like. We can hear from Livy. He said of Rome, "There was nowhere in this city that was not imbued with religion and which was not occupied by some divinity. The gods dwell there." Very, very religious people. Very, very pious. The Greco-Roman historian Polybius, a politician and military officer, cites religious piety as a fundamental source of Roman power, saying, "The respect in which, in my opinion, the Roman constitution is most markedly superior is in its view of the gods. It seems to me that superstition, which we criticize in other people, is precisely what gives the Roman state its cohesion. In Rome, nothing plays a more elaborate or extensive role in people's private lives and in the political sphere than superstition. Many of my readers might find this strange, but it seems to me that it has been done for the sake of the common people. In a state of enlightened citizens, there would presumably be no need for such a course, but since the common people everywhere are fickle, since they are driven by lawless impulses, blind anger, and violent passion, the only option is to use mysterious terrors and all this elaborate drama to restrain them. So he's saying, from the perspective maybe of a cynic, of an agnostic even, or something, that actually this religious piety is very powerful for social cohesion. And that's what you hear some sort of alt-right people say, I'm not religious, but I see the utility of religion. Well, fine, that at least they're honest, but also that is not what the average Roman thought. The average Roman was actually believing in the gods, and not only that they punished people for not believing in them and not being pious and not participating in the rite as they should, because they believed that the fortune and health of Rome was due to the gods' favour. They were a very pious people. And that is what the character of Romulus represents in this film, for Romulus is the one who founds Rome. But Remus, the ill-fated brother, he represents something later which could be seen, in my view, as the modern European view, which is kind of just will to power and an empty nihilistic striving, desperate and depraved. See, Remus is happy to benefit from the favour of the gods at first when they get the Vestal. He's very happy, but his fortune changes. But as soon as she foresees a future he doesn't like, then he rebels against them. He says a number of really impious and blasphemous things in the film, and I shall show you some clips. He says God has abandoned us to his brother. And then he desecrates the sacred fire itself. He actually tries to put out the sacred fire, but it is rekindled. God has abandoned us, he says, and he goes completely mad and declares his own will as God, and then burns down the village that he himself won. All that effort to achieve, to take a village, and to sort of rise up in the world and change his fortune. But then he actually burns the village down inexplicably because he goes completely mad. And that's what maybe is a warning about pure willpower as an ideology does. Nietzsche himself did go mad. He went mad. Willpower by itself is not enough as a worldview. Willpower is important. You need strength of will. No doubt about that. But willpower is not a substitute for religion. And maybe that's what Nietzsche knew at some level, and that's why he went mad with his doctrine of the Superman. I have gone into this a bit more detail in my video called on Nietzsche and Beyond Nietzsche and Evil, about how I was 11, 12 years ago a Nietzschean, but that I surpassed that, I went beyond that, become a religious person. Okay, so now I'm going to just show y'all what I'm talking about, and do a little clips for you. Sorry about this. I'm not so fast. Okay. There you go. So that's the scene of Alba Longa. Alba Longa depicted very nicely in the film as a primitive sort of place, not like what perhaps you'd expect of ancient Rome, but actually that's probably what most of the buildings in that time looked like. I think maybe they went a little bit overboard with the primitivity, because it's also true that they did use stone buildings in that time and had done for quite some time in the Mediterranean. So there's no stone buildings in the whole film, which is a little bit over the top perhaps. But okay, whatever. But it's still it's good that they didn't go too far. But about 1 minute 18. Okay, listen to this. That's the Vestal saying, "You'll be destroyed." If obeying the will of the gods means killing my brother, then I am the only god I recognize. Now there you go, that's pretty blasphemous. And then he starts to assault the Vestal Virgin. She is untouchable, she's not supposed to be, and no one's supposed to handle her like that. And you see that this is just one of the examples where you see him become unholy, where he becomes impious and blasphemous in his behavior. And it culminates over the film with more of that sort of thing. He goes more mad, starts killing people, burning down his own town, until the end. Let me get 149. Okay. Near the end now. That's Remus. This stage, many of his men have been killed. Things aren't going so bad. They've been having a battle with the Albelongans. And there's a split now. Like, some of the people of this town, this other village, have started to rally behind Romulus, whereas Remus's men are mostly dead. That big man is one of Remus's men. They prepare a pyre. Remus looking a bit sheepish, but here's what he says. Something blasphemous. Romulus is there on the left with the leather apron. The fire, the sacred fire, is our downfall. What? The power is within us, and not with the gods. Inside here. There is no God. Atheism. Do you understand? What are we seeing here? What we're seeing is, a sort of a representation of the wickedness of atheism and its ultimate culmination. When you have no piety, no reverence for something higher, then you can declare yourself the ultimate power, and that becomes a burden too much for them to carry. The ultimate, the final end is that Remus is killed by his brother, as happens in the Roman legend, you should know. And Romulus then founds a city. He says, here we will found a city, and everyone will remember it, and remember, the importance of the gods. And it became a very, very, very pious city, and a culture that was built on piety, and became an empire known across the world and celebrated by those who didn't hate it for its piety. I'd say this film is just really cool sort of way of taking like an ancient legend, pagan legend, and kind of they make it like it's still like very religious. They take out some of the fantastical elements to make it a little bit more, normie tier. I don't know. I would have had the she-wolf in at the beginning, make it even cooler, but I guess they want to make it more realistic or something. I don't know. But the prophecy is, I suppose, supernatural, but you don't like because it comes true. But I guess you could say, oh, that's a coincidence. So they don't want to have an actually explicitly supernatural film. But whatever. This film's good, actually, and I was expecting it to be bad. Most, I think, of these historical dramas are pretty bad and they're disappointing. I don't like Game of Thrones and Vikings and all those things. They're so cucky. This one is not cucky. It's got all, native Italian people. It's got, a real proto-Latin, script, and it's got a really good message as a core moral message of the value of piety and the danger of impiety and atheism. So that's it from me. I think I've given you a good review here. Please go and watch the film. I'm going to do another film review tonight about Midsummer, but it won't be on Survivor Jive channel. It'll be on the Guide to Culture channel. So please watch that. I've got a lot to say about that film too. It was a good film. Also, I know a lot of people, right wingers, have been complaining about it, saying it's anti-white, but I'm going to explain how that's sort of true, but also there's more to it than that. This film can't just be dismissed so easily. I quite enjoyed Midsummer, but anyway, you'll see more of that later on. All right, keep surviving the jive. And by the way, let me say, because you're a patron, I love you. Thank you very much. You are really important. This whole project that I've been working on now for so many years, I never thought it would get this far, and I would be able to do it as much as I do it now. I pretty much live only off this, except I occasionally get some other work, some freelance work come in. But I wouldn't be able to do this without you, and you make this happen, and I'm going to keep the quality high. I'm going to keep going. I'm really determined to get better and better at making my videos and do better and better things in future. And you'll see more and more of Survive the Jive, and you'll be constantly impressed by what I come up with. That's my hope. That is my pledge. That is my prayer. And yeah, honor the gods, honor your people. See you.